True Crime Brewery contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Medical information is opinion based on facts of a crime and should not be interpreted as medical advice or treatment. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to True Crime Brewery. I'm Jill.
And I'm Dick.
On March 18th, 1990, 15-year-old fraternal twins Dannette and Jeanette Millbrook disappeared while out walking from a convenience store to their home in Augusta, Georgia. Earlier that day, the girls told their mother that a man in a white van had been following them. Nothing more is known about this man, and he would not be the only person of interest in the girls' disappearance. Join us at the quiet end for the Missing Millbrook Twins. Dannette and Jeanette's mother reported them missing that same evening, but she was told that she had to wait for 24 hours. Then, even after the 24 hours passed, the sheriff's office failed to investigate or follow up in any way with the family. In fact, when the girl's 17th birthday passed, the case was closed. The sheriff's explanation? The girls were now old enough that they could not be forced to return home. But this suggests that the girls were runaways, and there's no reason to believe this to be true. In fact, it seems clear that two poor black children were not a priority for the sheriff's department, and a significant injustice was done when they never bothered to look for Dannette and Jeanette. So is it too late now, or is there a chance that this cold case can somehow be solved? Let's talk about it.
Let's do that. We're going to drink a beer from Terrapin Beer Company in Athens, Georgia, home of the Bulldogs. The beer is Indiana Crunkles. I don't know where they got that name from. It's an IPA, 7.3% alcohol by volume. Beer is a hazy orange color, a small white head, a nice aroma. Interesting. So banana, orange, and citrus. Kind of a funny combination.
Yeah.
Taste followed the aroma. Banana, orange, and grapefruit. A little bit of biscuit-like malt. Medium-bodied, not a bad beer.
Well, I have to tell you, that sounds delicious to me, banana, orange, and grapefruit.
Yeah, see?
And when I was looking up that beer after you told me what you'd be reviewing, I think there are a bunch of different Crunkles.
Yeah, they tweak it.
Yeah, so Indiana Crunkles is just one in a long line of Crunkle beers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's open it up. All right, Dickie, follow me down here to the quiet end. No more Santa, of course, but, a lot of our old buddies are still here.
Yeah, the usual denizens are back.
Right. So we should have some fun with this. Sad case, of course, but a lot to talk about as far as what was missed, what could have happened. Just a lot of things to consider because we don't really know what happened to the girls, obviously.
No, and I'm not sure we ever will.
Well, that's the question. So why don't you start us out and tell everybody about this case, because some people have probably never heard of it.
Well, when Dannette and Jeanette disappeared, there was literally no investigation, and there was certainly no media coverage of their case, which should be shocking.
Well, it definitely should be. I mean, think of other girls that have disappeared, and what a big deal it's been in the national media.
Yeah.
So this was just kind of ignored.
You've got two 15-year-old girls that just vanish into thin air.
Yep.
You'd think there'd be a much more vigorous investigation with local, even national media attention.
Right.
But this is an extreme example of how cases of missing people of color are handled differently than cases of Caucasians.
Yes, I agree. It doesn't hurt to be attractive or wealthy either.
Right. Dannette and Jeanette were black, poor children of a single mother, and they were living in a racist community.
Sure.
And the institutional racism at the Augusta Police Department and Richmond County Sheriff's Department was deep-seated.
Absolutely. Now, of course, Augusta, Georgia is best known for the Masters Golf Tournament, which is held there every April. The Masters, which is a private invitational tournament launched in 1934, didn't invite a black competitor to play until 1975. And like you told me, that's when Lee Elder finally broke the color barrier. Augusta, which maintains strict secrecy over its membership roster, didn't admit its first black member then until 1990. and only then after being called out for its exclusionary policies. Until 1983, the club held to a strict tradition that golfers use only club caddies, and of course all of these caddies were black. It was only in 2012, if you can believe it, that the club allowed its first female members too. So in this area, being female and black, they didn't help you out any.
No, they didn't. Despite the wealth in some areas of Augusta and the hosting of the Masters tournament, and that brings in millions of dollars, Augusta, Georgia ranks as the 5th worst for economic well-being, 17th in child poverty, and 37th in adult poverty. Augusta was also among the top 30 for food insecurity and unemployment rates.
Yeah, so kind of bleak, other than that little wealthy pocket there.
Yes, it's quite striking. Because I've been to the Masters Golf Tournament in my younger days.
Mm-hmm.
And to get to it, you're driving down a street that looks like the street of any city. You know, it's kind of run down and not very nice. Turn into the driveway to the golf course, and it's like you enter a different world.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Yeah. It's just really, well, I'm sure it's not only Augusta. There are many places like this across the country.
Oh, yeah, no question.
So Dannette and Jeanette disappeared on March 18th, 1990, and throughout March, a big deal in Augusta was preparation for that year's Masters tournament. The best golfers meet up in this Georgia town each year during the first week of April, and they compete for a lot of money, the prestige of being a Masters winner, and that's the one where they get the green jacket, right?
That's what the members get to wear.
Yes. Do they get to bring the jacket home?
No.
Oh, okay.
You have a little locker room, and it's in your locker.
Okay. But if you win, you're not necessarily a member there.
No.
Okay. Tell us a little bit more about it, because that's fascinating.
Well, the golf course, Augusta National, of course, it was designed by Bobby Jones, who was a famous amateur golfer.
Of course. We all know that. Sure.
And it's just an absolutely gorgeous course.
Sure. Well, it also brings with it about 40,000 tourists per day over the whole week, leading up to and during the tournament.
That's right. I mean, it's a mob.
Yes.
So restaurants near the golf course downtown experience long wait times, at least an hour, probably more 2 to 3, because the population of that area basically doubles. But the Masters tournament wasn't anything that either Jeanette or Dannette would have been interested in. I'm for sure they wouldn't have been.
No.
They might have been peripherally aware of the impact it had on their hometown in terms of traffic and people and so on, but the tournament itself wasn't something that they would have kept up on. Where the girls and their family and friends lived was very different from the glam and money of the Masters.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So just out of curiosity, how much do you think it goes for a ticket to watch the Masters for like one day? How much would that cost a person? Because I don't think anyone that lived locally could afford to go.
No, well, you can't get a ticket now. They're all spoken for.
What do you mean all spoken for?
So you buy, at least as I remember, you buy a 4-day pass for many thousands of dollars, and you get a badge that you have to wear to show that you belong there, and off you go.
Okay, so most people, including myself, couldn't afford it.
No, we could not.
No.
Now, if you're lucky enough to know somebody, which is how I got in, I had a good friend who, through his company, had tickets, and I got to go to one round per year.
Wow.
And we had to go to a drugstore across the street from the entrance to the tournament and tell whose tag you were picking up, and off you go. Watch the tournament. At the end of the round, you have to go back to the drugstore, turn your badge in so the next person could pick it up.
Right. So just to watch one round would literally be thousands of dollars, especially now, because you're talking about a time quite a while back.
Yes, I am.
Yeah, right.
You're aging me.
No, I'm just saying it was a while ago.
Yeah, it was.
So Jeanette and Dannette Millbrook come from a large extended family. So they had 8 brothers and sisters, some older and some younger. The girls were fraternal, not identical twins. They were born on April 2nd, 1974, and they did grow up with a very devoted mother, even though their father was horrible. In addition to their multiple siblings, they also had cousins, nieces, nephews, aunts, and uncles. So it would seem that they'd have quite a bit of support.
It would. Yeah, that's a huge extended family.
Yes. So the twins lived with their mother, Mary Sturgis, nicknamed Louise, who worked to provide the best possible life for her children. The girls' father, John, was not involved in their lives. According to Louise, John was very abusive with her, and she ended up leaving him, mostly to save her children from being hurt by him. But despite the broken relationships, the girls were able to maintain a good relationship with their paternal grandparents. So they had family. According to their little sister Shantae, the girls each had her own unique personality. Well, of course they did. Just because you're twins doesn't mean you're the same person.
Right. Well, they were basically siblings because they were identical twins.
Just siblings of the same age. So Shantae said that Jeanette was a very sweet girl who loved kids and animals, and she was the quieter and more reserved girl. Dannette, Shantae said, was a bit louder and was always the one who would stand up for Jeanette. Shantae described both of them as good girls. They didn't go out with boys or get into any trouble, and they were normally at home spending time with family, almost like couch potatoes.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is fine because it kept them safe, at least for a time.
Yeah, that's how it was that Sunday, March 18th.
Yeah.
The family was mostly all together. They went to church in their Bethlehem neighborhood, which is located in the southern section of Augusta. That was in the morning, and then they came back home to have lunch. The pastor had given Louise some money for food, and the twins had been sent to pick up lunch for the family from a nearby Church's Chicken. So the walk to Church's Chicken was a 15 to 20-minute walk.
Okay, so just as a bit of an aside here, because it struck me, their Bethlehem neighborhood was a food desert. Food deserts are communities that have poor access to healthy, affordable food. Also sometimes referred to as healthy food priority areas, food deserts are concentrated in low-income and marginalized areas. So in food deserts, healthy foods like fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, meat, and fish are often expensive or even unattainable. So this lack of access to healthy foods in these communities definitely translates into some health disparities and higher rates of chronic disease. So this is just another aspect of the institutional racism, which certainly played a part in the failure of the twins' disappearance to be investigated. So they spent their money on fast food, not necessarily because they didn't want to eat healthy, because that's really all that was within their reach, because they had to walk.
And so when the girls returned home, the family sat and ate lunch together. And Jeanette told Louise that a man in a white van had been following them. But according to Louise, the girls didn't seem very upset by this.
No, they really weren't distressed because it really, unfortunately, wasn't that rare for weirdos to be following them or exposing themselves. You know, it was kind of a shitty neighborhood.
Yeah, so that stuff happened.
It did. But Louise thought, well, the girls are together, and that gave her more of a feeling that they were safe, because it wasn't like one girl was out walking alone. And it was the middle of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, so...
And after all, they did make it home.
They made it home from Church's Chicken, yes. So the weather was mild that Sunday, and the skies were clear. Jeanette and Dannette were home with their family, and they were discussing a transportation issue they had. They were dealing with the problem of how the twins would get to school for the next week. You see, the family had just moved from their home on 12th Street in downtown Augusta to an apartment in Jennings Homes on Cooney Circle. So their mom, Louise, had made the move to provide a safer home for her children. It had taken her a long time. She was on a waiting list to get this apartment. But the one bad thing about this was that the girls had to change school districts in order to live in the new home. But the girls would be allowed to finish up the year at their old high school. The remaining problem was that the bus would no longer pick them up. So Louise didn't want them to walk that far alone. It was nearly a 3-mile walk one way.
Yeah, no, that's a little much to be asking of a teenager.
Well, right. And then in the morning, they might be walking in the dark if they'd have to leave so early.
Right, because it's 3 miles, take a little bit of time.
Certainly.
Probably at least half an hour. Yeah.
Well, 3 miles an hour is a, medium to brisk walk. So, yeah, I think it would take more than half an hour.
Yeah, you're right.
So Louise didn't have the money to pay for the girls to take the city bus all week long. So she'd called their godfather, Ted. Ted lived in their old neighborhood about 2 miles away, and he agreed to give the girls $20 to pay for their bus rides all week. So Dannette and Jeanette decided to walk over to Ted's to get the money. The twins' 12-year-old sister, Shantae, asked if she could come along, but the twins said no. Maybe they wanted some time to themselves, or maybe they didn't want to worry about a 12-year-old getting tired on the walk, because when you're 15, 12-year-olds can be pretty lame.
Yeah, pesky little sisters.
Absolutely. So they left at 3 p.m., and they were expected to be home by dinner time. The girls arrived at their godfather's house, visited for a few minutes, and then got the money. Then they went on and visited with their cousin Juanita, who lived just a block away. The girls asked Juanita to walk back home with them and spend the night, but Juanita's mother was afraid that they would still be walking when it was getting dark, so she said no. Now, why she told her daughter no, but was okay with letting her nieces do it, I have no fucking idea. It's a little irritating to think about. So the girls then went by the home of their older sister, and they asked her to walk home with them too, but she turned them down. The thing is, she had just recently given birth, so it was really strange that they had asked her in the first place to walk with them.
Yeah, I don't think she'd be ready to take a 2-mile hike.
No, and she had the impression that Dannette and Jeanette didn't want to walk alone, so maybe they were already afraid of something.
That could be, because they've asked a couple people to
right.
walk home with them.
Yep, but for whatever reason, the big sister didn't ask them why. Later on, she would be the only one who thought the girls were acting a bit off, but they had no choice, and they had to walk back home, so that's what they were doing.
Yeah, they weren't going to make it any other way.
Well, no. Unfortunately, they weren't.
So on their way home, after they left their older sister's house, the girls stopped at the Pump and Shop convenience store that's on the corner of Martin Luther King Boulevard and 12th Street. The sun was setting by now. The clerk working at the convenience store, named was Gloria, knew the girls. When they lived there, they frequented the store, and she was a family friend. Gloria would recall the girls coming in to buy some chips and a couple of sodas with some extra money given to them by Ted, and then they were gone. Gloria said she turned her head for a moment after they paid for the items, and that's when the girls left.
Yeah, so she didn't see which way they'd gone. They were just gone when she turned around.
Yeah.
So when Jeanette and Dannette failed to return home that evening, their mother was, of course, very worried. She began calling around town to see if anyone had seen them. Of course, Louise knew that there was a lot of crime in the area, so she became very concerned early on. Remember, she'd moved the children away from the neighborhood they had walked to for safety, so she knew where they'd walked to was risky. But, she felt fairly secure because it's the middle of the day and they're together.
Yeah, well, it's starting to get late. Starting to get to where darkness is going to come.
Oh, absolutely. And she only allowed them to go out on their own if they were together. So Louise called up the nearby Pump and Shop gas station because it was a place that the family had gone to frequently. And the attendant, Gloria, had recognized her daughters, and she let Louise know that the girls had stopped by the store that day. Gloria told Louise that the twins arrived at the Pump and Shop with some money for snacks. But she couldn't remember which way they had walked off, and she hadn't seen if they had gotten into a vehicle after they left. So when she was asked if the girls had been acting strangely, Gloria said no, they hadn't been. She said they came by and bought something to drink and some candy and some chips. According to the Richmond County Sheriff's Office records, this final sighting of the twins had happened at about 4:30 p.m., so it was still light out.
Yeah, this is March.
Yes.
So maybe for another hour?
Yeah, it was getting towards the dusky time, right?
Right.
Definitely when they weren't home by dinner, Louise was worried that it was getting dark. So then Louise called the police that evening, hoping to report her daughters missing and, God forbid, have them go out and look for them. But the Richmond County Sheriff's Office told Louise that she'd just have to wait at least 24 hours and then file a missing persons report.
I'd like to know who came up with that rule. It's no longer the case.
It's not a rule, no, but
who figured that you got to give 24 hours before you declare a child missing?
I don't know, but it used to definitely be a thing. So with absolutely no help coming from law enforcement, Louise went out to try and find her missing daughters. And 12-year-old Shantae went with her. They went down Olive Road toward MLK Boulevard where the girls had last been seen, but they were unable to find anything that night. So after 24 hours had passed, Louise called the sheriff's office again. The dispatcher put her through to Detective Jim Shipp, and she told him that her 15-year-old twins were missing, and he told her, well, they've probably run away. Without knowing anything about them, anything about the situation, that's just what he assumed.
Yeah, 15-year-olds, they ran away.
Oh, come on. So we have no way of knowing if his reaction would have been different if the twins had been from the wealthier side of town, but for whatever reason, he had decided right away that the Millbrook twins were runaways. So they were pretty much written off as runaways within hours of disappearing, and no one in law enforcement ever, at this point, went out to look for them.
The twins' 16th birthday came 2 weeks after they went missing. That day came and went, with no sign of Dannette or Jeanette. The Millbrook family and some of their friends from church went around the area hanging up posters that the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, that's NCMEC, had made after the twins vanished.
Yeah, so their family had believed that the police would go through the normal investigative process, canvassing the area, interviewing witnesses, and just asking people if they'd seen the girls. They did speak with some people, including Gloria, the woman who'd been working at the pumpkin shop on the night the twins disappeared. Also, they spoke with their godfather, whose house they had gone to for the bus fare. But other family members and friends, like their cousin and sister, whom they had visited on their way home, were never interviewed by police. And that's even though they were some of the last known people to see the girls.
No, it's kind of a cursory investigation.
Oh, that's being generous to call it that, Dick. I think it was very, very terrible. Practically non-existent, really, because they had assumed that the girls ran away.
Yeah, so you don't have to work real hard.
Yeah, well, they just didn't care. And that's the only way to really look at it, is they didn't care. So their father, John Millbrook, who had not had a close relationship with the twins and who had a criminal history, wasn't interviewed either. Despite living close to where they had disappeared from and having a rocky relationship with them, John never spoke with the police. In fact, John had no interest in looking for his daughters. Remember, Louise had divorced him because he was physically abusive, and the twins had very little to do with him. According to other family members, John wasn't interested in talking about this case at all. He had told their older sister that if the police came and asked about him, she should tell them that he was dead. So that's suspicious.
It is.
I mean, not only that he doesn't really care to look for them, he's kind of a deadbeat asshole, so you can see that. But then to try and hide? Why? What's going on there? Now, the family did contact several organizations and news agencies, but they didn't receive much support. It seems like the case of 2 missing black teenagers wasn't worthy of much attention at the time, especially since the police had decided to treat them as runaways, with no evidence of that being the case.
Then, a little over a year after the girls had gone missing, one of the investigators on the case came to the Millbrook family home, and this investigator told the family that the case had reached a dead end. He explained that the twins were now 17 years old. So at this point, due to Georgia laws regarding runaway teenagers, they could no longer be forced to return home from wherever they were. And because they were considered runaways, there was no reason for the police to continue looking for them.
So that's a crazy thing.
This is just such circular logic.
Yeah, right? Makes no sense. So this statement given to the family by one of the investigators contradicted what Louise was later told by the NCMEC. And that's the same organization that had helped them spread awareness of the missing twins and given them flyers. It's the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and they told Louise that the police had reported to them that they had closed the case because the girls had been found. Now, Shantae believes that it was Detective Shipp who confirmed this with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and he actually would admit that he had done it. So it's difficult to believe that 2 teenage girls with no resources or financial support could vanish without a trace. So why did Detective Shipp assume that this was a runaway situation without even looking into the other possibilities? Good question.
He made up his mind within hours of meeting the mother.
Oh, yeah. Well, he told her over the phone they probably ran away the first time she called.
Yeah.
So in the 2019 Oxygen True Crime documentary about this case, former federal prosecutor Laura Coates spoke with Detective Shipp, who by then was retired and off the case. In her interview with Shipp, he said that he had based his conclusion that the girls were runaways on his belief that the Millbrook twins were known. Now, what does that make you think when you hear that?
That they had come across law enforcement before.
Which really wasn't true. He didn't give any example of trouble they'd been in either. He also told Coates that he had spoken with the principal of the high school, who had told him that he saw the two girls and he tried to get them to come back to school. Now, conveniently or not, the principal has since died, so this story cannot be corroborated. Shipp said that he spoke to Louise Millbrook. In her interview with Shipp, he said that he had based his conclusion that they were runaways on his belief that the Millbrook twins were known. So what does that mean to you when you hear that they were known?
Well, if they were known, that means they've come across law enforcement before.
Right, which really isn't the case.
No,
and he didn't give any example of trouble they had been in. He also told Coates that he had spoken with the principal of the high school, who had told him that he saw the two girls and he had tried to get them to come back to school. But this principal had since died, so this story couldn't be corroborated. Shipp said that he spoke to Louise Millbrook every 1 to 2 weeks about the case, which is also something that doesn't seem to be true.
No, Louise herself has said that she only spoke with Detective Shipp once or twice in total, not
which
just
is amazing.
Weekly. And when confronted with this, Shipp suggested that Louise had a low IQ, and that's why she can't remember their frequent contacts.
So this guy just seems like a total racist.
He sounds like a turd.
Yeah, who's looking down on these people.
So when he was asked who called the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children to say that the girls had been found, Shipp said it was him. He closed the case, he said, because other people had told him they had seen the girls. Now, he never saw them. He never confirmed these sightings. But he went ahead and closed the case based on other people's statements about seeing the twins.
Right, which is not the way it's done, obviously.
No.
You have to confirm that they've been found. You can't just take someone's word for it. That's crazy. The Millbrook family never saw Dannette or Jeanette after they went missing on March 18, 1990. The girls never called, never wrote a letter, or corresponded in any way with anyone again. The girls had no IDs on them when they went missing. They had no clothing or personal items other than what they were wearing, and their Social Security numbers have never been used. They were just 15 years old with about $20 between them. But still, the sheriff's position was that they had run away to live somewhere else. That just makes no sense at all.
Certainly if they'd run away, unless they had a stash of clothes and stuff somewhere, they couldn't have been running away.
No, and there was no indication that they would have wanted to. They were good students. They were close to their mom. They liked to hang around the house. There was no reason. They didn't have boyfriends or anything. Now, most of the runaways in the area where the Millbrooks lived were found, 95% according to the 1990 records. There was just one investigator who handled all of the runaway cases. But runaways typically show certain signs before they leave their homes. They send out signals that things just aren't right at home. In fact, according to the American Academy of Pediatrics, before running away, many children struggle with mental illness, experience school failure, or engage with peer groups who participate in high-risk behaviors like promiscuity or drug and alcohol abuse. And none of these pertain to the girls. Many runaways have also experienced abuse or neglect before they run away. And there were no indications that Dannette or Jeanette had any of these issues. According to their family members, these were well-behaved girls who spent the vast majority of their time with their mother and sisters. They were never known to have boyfriends or to drink or use drugs. They had no major life traumas and no criminal records. They were actually doing quite well in school.
So these are girls that you would not consider to be at risk for being a runaway.
Exactly. And neither of the girls got any phone calls on the day they disappeared, so it's not like they were going to meet someone. And Jeanette had a cat named Jennifer, who her family said she would have never left behind. She loved that cat. Also, Dannette needed to take seizure medication every day, and she hadn't taken any medication with her. Now, disturbingly, the area the girls lived in did have a significant amount of crime against women and children. So one example is Tiffany Nelson, a 9-year-old girl who disappeared in 1994 while out on a bike ride, and her body was found in 2005. Henry Louis Wallace, also known as the Taco Bell Strangler, is a serial killer who killed several black women in South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia between March of 1990 and March of 1994. Human remains were found just over the border in Augusta, South Carolina, and these remains were all from young black women. Only one of the women has been identified. Between 1987 and 1993, 4 bodies were found in the woods of rural Aiken County in nearby South Carolina. 2 of the bodies were identified as missing women from the area: Jackie Council, who went missing in 1986, and Ristine Durden, who disappeared in 1989. The other 2, who were found in 1987 and 1993, have still not been identified.
And among the many theories that have circulated since their disappearance, there has been speculation that the 2 teens may have fallen victim to a suspected serial killer named Joseph Patrick Washington. Washington both lived and worked at a brickyard in Augusta, and this is not far from where the twins lived and from the areas they traveled through on the day they went missing. Washington lived on Hale Street, and that meant to get to work he might have driven on MLK Boulevard, where the pump and shop was located. While he was known to drive 3 different cars, not vans, he did have access to other vehicles because he worked transporting materials to and from the brickyard. He was actively attacking women in the early 1990s. That's around the same time the twins went missing, and this was reported by the Augusta Chronicle in 2017. Washington had a type who he victimized: young black women, ranging in age from teenagers to women in their early 30s, with short hair. So that obviously fits the teen's description.
Yeah, they both had short hair, too. After abducting his victims, Washington would take them to a second location, where he would often shoot them in the stomach and then rape them. Some of the girls who survived recalled that he had held his shirt up with his teeth so he wouldn't get blood on it as he raped them. Washington was sentenced to 17 consecutive life sentences in 1995 for abductions that took place between 1991 and 1993. He was also set to go to trial for the 1991 murders of 2 other women, Marilyn Denise Kelly and Loretta Dukes. And he was a suspect in the 1991 murder of a 3rd woman. He never made it to trial for murder because he died in 1999. Of course, the problem with solving this case now is that it's been over 30 years since the girls disappeared, and no investigation was done back in 1990. That's when things would still have been fresh in people's minds.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly have trouble going back 30 years and trying to recall what was going on.
Well, absolutely. So much has changed, and people forget, and people move. It's just, It's a mess, really. There are just so many possibilities of what happened to them, but so much has been forgotten, and so much evidence would no longer even be available. The twins' family and neighbors have told stories of rapes and attempted rapes in the neighborhood, and about the dangerous shortcut behind the old pump and shop store. They say that grown men used to chase preteen girls down the street, and that there was a well-known local exhibitionist who trespassed in people's yards. And then, of course, there's the twins' biological father, John Millbrook, who had a long history of abuse. But the original investigator never looked for Jeanette and Dannette, and the case just sat closed for years after they turned 17. So why was this case closed? Back in 1991, the family was told that the case was closed because the girls had turned 17. Then when the family spoke to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, They were told that the case had been closed because the twins had been found. Then someone from the sheriff's office told Shantae, the girl's little sister, that the twins had been put into foster care and adopted out.
Huh.
Yeah, so this was after Richmond County Sheriff's Office and the Augusta PD merged in 1996. So if the police believed that the girls had been put into foster care and adopted out to another family, this action would have gone completely against several rules and protocols. Louise, as the mother of the twins, did not have any knowledge of this happening, and Child Protective Services had never been called on Louise for any of her children, and 2 teen girls would not have been removed while the younger children were left with their mother.
Well, the teenagers anyway, they would have had something to say about it too.
Right, and there would have been paperwork and there would have been a process.
Yeah.
So if CPS had taken any children from Louise's home, they certainly would have taken the younger kids away as well, because younger kids are more at risk. So if this is, as it is now believed, a misunderstanding of the case, why did it happen? There really are no facts to support it. The hosts of the Fall Line podcast go through this aspect, and they have theorized that it is not maliciousness, but actually apathy. 2 relatives of the twins, who also had the last name Millbrook, had been put into the foster care system. So it's possible that the original detective or the juvenile investigator that worked with him on this case had seen that 2 children with that surname were in the system and then just decided the case was closed without doing any further investigation. Now, there of course were other obvious errors in this original investigation. Their last name is misspelled as Millbrooks, and Jeanette's middle name was misspelled. A deeper look reveals that something more might have been going on here. The juvenile investigator shared his thoughts with the detective in charge of the case, and he told the detective that he had actually seen the twins since their disappearance. He made the claim that he had personally found the twins and that they had been trying to get to Texas. There's nothing to back that up.
So the original investigator decided that the girls had run away to start a new life elsewhere. And it seems like much of his conclusion was based on his interview with an administrator at the school the girls went to, Lucy Laney High School. Apparently, the principal told the detective that he had seen the girls after their disappearance and asked them to return to school, but they refused. But the detective did nothing to confirm this report, and no officer even put on paper that they had seen the twins.
Yeah, so that doesn't really count as anything.
No.
One conclusion the original detective had considered was that one of the twins had gotten pregnant, and then they both decided to run away together. Again, there's no evidence to back this up at all. There's no evidence to support either of the twins being pregnant. Remember, neither of them even had a boyfriend at the time of their disappearance. Also, their older sister, whose home they had visited on the night they disappeared, was a teenage mother, and Shantae, their younger sister, would get pregnant just a few years later. So the idea that Jeanette and Dannette ran away because one of them had gotten pregnant in no way adds up, because their mother would have supported them.
Now, after the police forces merged in 1996, the Augusta Police Department was taken over by Richmond County Sheriff's Office. They took over their case files. Since the investigation into the Millbrook twins had been closed for 3 years at that point, the original case file might have been shredded, but the police have been less than forthcoming when it comes to the case files of the twins. They claim that their case file was destroyed, either by shredding when the departments merged or by a flood in the 1990s.
So in 2013, the case was reopened after newly elected Richmond County Sheriff Richard Roundtree took over. Shantae saw a video on TV with the new sheriff of Augusta, Richmond County, and thought he really might want to help. So feeling like a fresh set of eyes might be what her sister's case needed, Shantae decided to contact the sheriff's office. So her call was returned by Scott Peebles, who was the incident commander for the sheriff's office at that time. The Fall Line podcast was able to get 2 incident reports on the twins, each about 2 pages long, and they're dated in June 2013. The information in these reports was gathered by the cold case investigator who was assigned to the case for a short time in 2013. But the reports weren't new. They were actually copied from the original 1990 report, which they said had supposedly been destroyed.
Yeah, either the flood got it or it got shredded.
Yeah, so what's going on here?
A little more subterfuge.
Seems like it, yes. Now, this new sheriff was a black man who seemed to care about the community, so we'll see how he deals with it.
On the day of their disappearance, Dannette was wearing a white Mickey Mouse t-shirt, white jeans, and black sneakers. Dannette was quiet, but was definitely the leader between the two. Jeanette was a little dressed up that day. She wore a blue pullover, white turtleneck, a beige skirt, tights, and sneakers. She hadn't changed her outfit after church. Now, the girls were old enough to walk alone, but their mother didn't like them to go out walking. They had decided it was better to walk one time to get the bus fare than to walk 10 times in the next week going back and forth to school.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah?
So the twins never would have taken a ride with a stranger, according to their family. So assuming they didn't take a ride, they would have walked down Forest Road, not Florence as it's listed in the incident report. They picked up some money from their godfather, then walked on to Tin Cup Lane, where they visited their cousin Juanita. Remember, Juanita got the feeling that they wanted some company, but her mother wouldn't allow her to go with them. Juanita did frequently spend the night at the twins' house, but this was a school night. So did something happen between Forest Road and Tin Cup Lane that had frightened them so that they asked her if she would walk with them? Of course, we have no way of knowing because they didn't say anything like that to Juanita or her mother. But remember, at lunchtime that same day, the girls had told Louise that a man in a white van had been following them from Church's Chicken. But the girls played it down, and Louise had forgotten all about it until later. Maybe the man in the van had them worried. Or maybe they ran into someone else that day that had scared them.
So back to later that day they disappeared, the twins had left Juanita's house and walked a couple blocks to Pickwood Avenue to see their older sister, A.C. Ender. The original investigator never spoke with A.C. Ender. In fact, their stop at her house isn't even on the incident report. A.C. Ender wasn't involved in the investigation at all until 2013, when she was asked for a DNA sample to help search the system for victims who had never been identified.
23 years after they disappeared.
That's right. So we know that the girls walked from A.C. Ender's house to the Pump and Shop convenience store that's on the corner of MLK Boulevard and 12th. We don't know if they stopped anywhere else along the way. At this point, they had been walking for nearly 2 hours. They were thirsty and hungry. The clerk Gloria thought they seemed normal and happy. She talked to the police after talking to the girl's mother and little sister. She had glanced away while they were still in the store, and when she turned around, the twins were gone.
Yeah, so after the police told the twins' mother, Louise, that she had to wait the 24 hours to file a missing persons report, Louise and Shantae went out and walked around the area looking for the girls. And they did speak with Gloria. On their way back home, they looked in the alleyways, wooded areas, and wherever the girls could possibly be. The incident reports with the misspellings, the gaping holes in interviewing any possible witnesses, and the inaccurate order of events are likely based on the report taken the day after the disappearance. Because remember, they wouldn't take a report the day of the disappearance.
Right.
So the next contact between the police and Louise was a whole week later. And according to this investigator, the case was always considered a runaway case, and it was soon handed over to a juvenile investigator, now deceased, who closed the case. But this juvenile officer, Mr. Westbrook, was the one who, after the case was closed, told Louise that he was going to help her look for her girls. The original investigator has said that this juvenile officer, Westbrook, had found the girls, but that is not at all true.
So back in 1991, when the original investigator came to Louise and told her that the case was being closed, he also told her that the girls had been found, but could not be forced to return home because they were 17 years old now. But this investigator gave no indication of where the girls had been seen or where they were. Louise did ask where the twins had been found, and the investigator told her he couldn't tell her where, but they had been located.
So now, for some reason, it's a secret?
Yeah, because they're 17 now.
Come on.
Louise asked for an address, a location, or a contact for the girls, but none was given. So certainly this was enough for Sheriff Roundtree, remember he's the new guy in town, to decide that an injustice had been done.
Right, but his reaction isn't super impressive either. The early closure of the missing persons case of the Millbrook twins has harmed the family and the effectiveness of the investigation in a multitude of ways. We have no way of knowing how many witnesses were never interviewed and what information, which could have been easily found back in 1990, may now never be found. So it's upsetting to learn that Shantae has been asked how the twins are doing by people who just assumed that the girls were actually found years back. Robert Lowry of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children has confirmed that the case was removed from their database back in the early 1990s. Louise called the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children to complain about this, but they once again verified with Richmond County that the twins were no longer missing according to the original investigator's report. So the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children did not believe Louise, but instead took the word of the investigator.
Oh, shame on them.
Well, yes, but maybe they're supposed to take the word of the investigator because the investigator is supposed to be the professional here, doing their job.
Yeah, I guess. I suppose you don't necessarily want to take the word of the family member because they might have been involved in the disappearance.
Right. So you really do need to depend somewhat on the investigator. And if you don't know what shitballs they are, then you might just accept what they say. A lot of this investigation was hearsay or information based on hearsay and rumors. But the hearsay made its way into the case file from investigators and their assumptions or efforts to set aside the investigation. There really weren't a lot of rumors about Dannette and Jeanette's disappearance by people living in their community. Now, the case file was definitely closed in 1991, but who made that decision? Louise and Shantae have said that the original investigator, Detective Shipp, came to their house and told them that it was being closed because the girls were now 17 and couldn't be forced to go back home. But we know that that's not how it works. Of course not. If you look at the missing persons cases, there are cases from decades ago where people went missing while they were a minor. There are age progression photos, and those are posted through the Charlie Project all the time. The original investigator has said that the case was handed over to a juvenile officer named Westbrook, and he alleged that Westbrook had made contact with the twins. A family member recalled talking to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in the early 1990s, and they were told to contact Westbrook because he was the one familiar with the file, and he was the one who'd been in touch with the girls. This family member said that when she explained that the girls had not been found, she was told to go and ask their mother where they were. Jeez.
Round and round.
Yeah.
So this all leads back to the original investigator. That's Detective Jim Shipp. He's now retired. He closed the case in 1991, but the twins weren't removed from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children until 1993. Shipp changed jobs, moved into a teaching position in 1994. Some people have speculated that he called the center and closed the investigation in order to clear his records.
Right, so just kind of cleaning things up before he leaves.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to leave any of these open investigations, even though they are clearly not solved. But the center is really limited in these situations because they don't do any investigating. They actually base their information on what law enforcement provides, and they can help with poster distribution and things like that. But they really are extremely limited without an active law enforcement investigation. The Department of Juvenile Justice also has no records of the twins in their system. Westbrook, the juvenile officer, denied ever making any contact with the twins. Westbrook and the principal, who remember supposedly told Detective Shipp that he had seen the girls, are now both deceased, so there's no way to follow up on that.
That's right.
Shipp allegedly visited the girls' high school and brought 2 different stories back to Louise. The first one was that the girls left home because their mother had too many kids. Now that sounds like something the bastard would say, right? I don't think the girls would be thinking that. And then came the stories that one of the twins had been pregnant. But remember, the twins had teen sisters who had become pregnant and their mother had supported them. And remember their walk on the afternoon of their disappearance. They had asked their cousin and their sister to walk home with them. So how would that help them if they were planning to run away, to have another person with them? Makes no sense. And neither of the twins were in trouble at school either, but their records have not been released to the family. There had been an incident with Dannette on the school bus in 1989. The twins had attended different schools for 1 year and they were in different grades. Dannette may have been held back because she spent 1 year getting intensive educational support at another school, and then she was returned to attend high school with Jeanette. In that year of separation, they rode different buses and waited at different bus stops. So Shantae, who was actually at a third bus stop, saw what happened in this incident. For several weeks, a girl at Jeanette's stop was picking on her. So Jeanette tried to avoid the bully. But one day, Dannette had had enough. She marched over to her sister's bus stop and confronted the girl who had been bullying Jeanette. And a fight broke out as kids from all 3 bus stops huddled around and watched the fight. So during the fight, a police cruiser was passing by, and the officer stopped to break up the fight. He took down the names of the girls. No written summons or other paperwork was filed. But the girl who Dannette had fought with was related to an employee at the high school, the principal, in fact. So the girls made up, but maybe this fight left the principal with a bad feeling about the Millbrook twins. And maybe this led him to have a bad opinion of the twins, and maybe he had passed on this opinion to the original investigator, Detective Shipp. Shantae has wondered if this made the investigator assume that the twins were troublemakers. He made assumptions about what the twins may have been up to then. This seems to be reflected in an experience Shantae had with Detective Shipp after her sisters had gone missing. This was just a week or 2 after Shipp had visited Louise. Shantae was playing outside with her cousins at a friend's house, and Shipp showed up looking for the twins. So once it was clarified that Shantae was not one of the missing twins, he told her and her cousins to get into his car. And then he drove them to the housing project Underwood Homes in southern Augusta. He told the girls that he had seen the twins at the apartment of someone named Von Trace, and that they were up to no good there. They went inside and the twins weren't there. So then the investigator dropped the girls back where he had picked them up and left. And Louise wouldn't even find out about this until much later.
Since Shantae was a 19-year-old, she's been calling the sheriff's office quite often. After Westbrook was dead, and no one seemed to help her. No one seemed to want to help her. Louise lost all hope, so Shantae took over the effort to find her sisters. Shantae and a co-worker at Kmart began to look online for the twins, but they couldn't find any mention of the missing girls. So Shantae called the sheriff's office and was told that she would need to get in touch with the DHS office because a file there said that Dannette and Jeanette had been taken into foster care. Shantae called DHS, but DHS said they didn't have any record of the girls being put into foster care. Shantae then contacted the foster care system and learned that there was no record of the girls being in foster care or being adopted. It was another Millbrook family member whose children had been taken into foster care. Anyway, there's no way that the state could have taken Louise's daughters without informing her and giving her a chance to get them back.
Exactly. So the new sheriff, Sheriff Richard Roundtree, was contacted by the producers of the Fall Line podcast for an interview in 2017, but they were told that he was too busy to speak with them. So although Roundtree had reopened the case in 2013 and had seemed to be interested in solving it, he didn't talk with the Millbrook family since then. So 4 years went by and he never even talked to them. So that's why I say he turned out to be a bit of a disappointment.
No kidding.
When Shantae then called the sheriff's office, she was asked for the details of the case. But then she was told that what she said could not be true. She was told that the case had never been closed and she was not given a meeting with the sheriff again. So of course she was frustrated and quite upset. That's when Shantae and the Fall Line producers forwarded articles from the Augusta Chronicle newspaper to the sheriff's office, highlighting the department's own quotes about the case. And after that, a lieutenant called the producers back. The sheriff's office declined participating in any podcast. He also declined to give a statement on behalf of the department. He did offer to take any information from them, but then he explained that they would not be allowed to ask any questions of him. So a meeting was arranged and the producers met Shantae and Louise at the sheriff's office. One podcast host and Shantae were allowed to meet with the sergeant. They were told that the department was underfunded and understaffed. They acknowledged errors in the incident reports, but said that it was not up to them to correct them. How can that be? Then who's it up to correct their mistakes if not them? Isn't that crazy?
Interesting.
The sergeant took no questions but did accept research and maps that were provided. He did seem to listen, and before they left, he gave Shantae his card and asked her to call him personally from then on. So unfortunately, this case has not been solved and no significant information has been found that we know of. In 2019, Oxygen produced a documentary on the case, and they spoke to the Fall Line podcasters and did get an interview with Sheriff Richard Roundtree. But nothing new really came out in this documentary. So let's just go over some theories of what may have happened to Dannette and Jeanette.
Well, the least likely scenario is that the twins were runaways. I think we can dismiss that idea entirely. They had no issues at home, no issues at school. They didn't take any personal belongings with them, and there's been absolutely no trace of them since they vanished. Their activities on their last day showed two girls who wanted to get bus fare to school for the next week. Every action of theirs indicated that they wanted to go home. And remember, they had asked a cousin and a sister to walk home with them. So let's move past the runaway idea.
Yeah, I'm on board. I agree. So then there are 3 serial killers who were active in this time frame. Henry Louis Wallace, known as the Taco Bell Strangler, Ronaldo Javier Rivera, and long-haul trucker John Boyder were all committing crimes in South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia in 1990. But honestly, none of these men seem like good leads, and there's no evidence that any of them ever had any interactions with the Millbrook twins. So Wallace mostly murdered women he knew in South and North Carolina, and these were mostly co-workers. Boyder used his job as a long-haul trucker to target his victims, who were mostly white, transient sex workers. Ronaldo Rivera targeted white, blonde adult women. So these 3 seem to have quite specific victim profiles which don't match the Millbrook twins. But then there is another alleged serial killer who seems like a more likely suspect, and that's Joseph Patrick Washington. We mentioned him earlier. He died in 1999 while serving a sentence for kidnapping and rape and waiting to go on trial for murder. He drove an older model yellow Ford Pinto, a Dodge Omni, and an Oldsmobile Cutlass, but he may have had access to a truck or van through his job at the brickyard. His victims were black, short-haired girls and women between their teens and early 30s, and his approach was to drive up to women walking down the street, hold them at gunpoint, and force them into his car. His method, remember, was to disable his victims with a gunshot to the stomach and then sexually assault them while they were suffering from their wound, and then he would leave them for dead. But a few of them did survive. He'd been active in the Bethlehem area where the twins lived. One of his victims was abducted from a gas station at 15th Street and MLK Boulevard. The twins disappeared after last being seen at 12th Street and MLK. He also lived just a couple of blocks from John Millbrook, the twins' biological father. Based on statements from some of his old friends, the 2 men had known each other, so John Millbrook knew this guy, which could be the connection.
Could be, yeah.
The Georgia Bureau of Investigation took multiple samples from Washington's home and cars back in 1993, 2 years after the twins' case was closed. Familial DNA wasn't taken from their mother and sister, though, until 2013, so it's never been compared to the samples from Washington's cars and home. Shantae and Louise were never made aware of Washington until the Fall Line podcasters notified them, and that was in 2017.
Wow.
Yeah. So victim 9-year-old Tiffany Nelson disappeared from a gas station in 1994, and her remains were recovered in 1995 in a shallow grave in a wooded area in adjacent Columbia County. She had been riding her bike. She was considerably younger than Dannette and Jeanette, but her race and the circumstances of her disappearance would make it worth further investigation.
And there's another popular but far-fetched theory, and that is that law enforcement was involved in the twins' disappearance, and their failure to investigate was part of a cover-up. Now, one issue with this is that a cover-up would take organization and effort.
Right.
But investigators in this case seem to have been much more apathetic and uncaring than being manipulative conspirators. The original investigator in this case, Jim Shipp, showed no concern for the missing children. In fact, when asked by the Fall Line host if he believed the Millbrook twins were still alive, he said, "I don't have any reason to believe they're not alive. But if you find 2 dead twins somewhere, let me know."
Ugh.
How do you like that?
I don't like it.
Disgusting glibness over 2 missing children gives people an idea of just how little this man cared about this case.
Absolutely. There are other unsolved cases in Augusta, Georgia, but there's no apparent connection between these cases and the Millbrook case. Like any city, they've had numerous robberies, burglaries, and sex crimes, but there have been a few crimes which are similar. Aiken, South Carolina is just about 20 miles away from Augusta, Georgia, and Aiken has had many female victims going back for decades, especially in the 1980s and 1990s. And there have been bodies found off of Highway 191 near Shaw Creek. Only one of these bodies has been identified. 3 unidentified were bodies found in that area. In the early 2000s, Shantae saw a facial reconstruction of one of these victims, and it did look a lot like her sister Jeanette. This Aiken Doe, as she is sometimes called, does have a striking resemblance to Jeanette Millbrook. So Shantae called law enforcement in Aiken, but she was told that it was not Jeanette. The age was off, with the medical examiner determining that she was in her early 20s. But still, no DNA comparison has been made. Would you think it would be worth a try?
I think it would be. Early 20s?
Yeah, 6-7 years. It's not that big.
15 years?
Yeah.
Of age? I mean, that's close enough.
I would think so, at least to check.
Yeah.
Another possibility of what happened to the twins is sex trafficking. Now, back in 1990, this was less well known than it is now. Tourist areas like Augusta, though, did have a thriving illegal sex industry, and this would have included sexual exploitation of children. There's a high rate of interstate and intercounty travel with these victims, and Atlanta is a popular destination for these victims. So if the twins are alive, to me, sex trafficking seems like the most likely scenario, if they're alive, which is a very big if.
Yeah, I think so. That is a very big if.
Yeah. Now, there are also people closer to the twins' home and family that should be investigated, and of course one of these people is John Millbrook, their father. Louise remembers her abusive relationship with him, his temper, and how he had shot a gun at visitors through their own front door. He was also known to be cruel to his own sister and mother. Jeanette and Dannette didn't spend much time with him, but they did go to his house to visit with their grandmother from time to time. John didn't have a car, but he had some shady friends who had their own cars. After the twins' disappearance, John was convicted of helping some friends hide the body of a man they had killed in a drug deal gone wrong. John had actually rolled this man's body up in a rug and drove it to the city dump. But he's never been interviewed, and he refuses to give a DNA sample. When he was asked in 2013, he told the twins' older sister to change her phone number and to avoid talking to law enforcement at all about the girls. Now, why would you do that about your own daughters? Even if you're not Father of the Year, you think you'd have some concern.
Yeah, this guy sounds like he wouldn't.
No, he sounds terrible. He's a murderer, really, or he hung around with murderers.
Yes, he did.
And definitely a violent man. The Oxygen documentary did have a short interview with the new sheriff, Richard Roundtree. He's actually the first black sheriff elected there, and he did show quite a bit of interest in the Millbrook twins case. But there's no public information on what he has done for this case at this point. And you have to remember, he's been sheriff for over 10 years now. The sheriff doesn't have a cold case unit, though, so there are few resources for a 30-year-old case. In the Oxygen documentary, a letter sent to the Fall Line podcasters from a prisoner named Ernest Vaughn, suggesting that he knew where the girls' bodies were, was investigated. It had been forwarded to the sheriff in 2017, but no known follow-up had been done as of 2019. The twins' father, John Millbrook, hung out with murderers and was arrested for hiding a body. His two co-conspirators, Ernest Vaughn and Reggie Cummings, were still in prison in 2019, but John Millbrook had only spent a few years in prison for his part in this crime. The investigators in the documentary, former prosecutor Laura Coates and retired detective Paige Reynolds, did write back to Vaughn. Then they went to see his daughter, who claimed to have information that he had shared with her. The daughter said that Vaughn told her the twins were dead and he knew where they could recover their remains. So Coates and Reynolds did finally speak on the phone with Vaughn, and he told them that John Millbrook and their friends all did crack and sold crack. So according to Vaughn, he heard that the girls had been given alcohol and marijuana while at their father's house on the evening they disappeared. And when she was drunk, some of the druggy guys at the house took advantage of one of the twins. Then the other twin saw this, and one of the men hit her, and she fell, hitting her head on a table. Vaughn said he saw her head get busted open on the table, and according to Vaughn, there had been 8 or 9 men in that house. So that's really gross to even think about.
It sure is.
Then he just said that he didn't think the girls were alive any longer. So, in my opinion at least, he didn't seem super credible. What do you think?
No.
You really can't trust a lot of these prisoners that have information because they might be just trying to get out of prison. But they did ask for more specifics or a name, and Vaughn gave the name Little Cheese and Oodle Boy. When asked, Shantae said she was familiar with the name Little Cheese from her childhood. She also did verify that her father knew these guys and that there was some drug dealing going on at his place. So Coates and Reynolds took the information they got from Vaughn to Sheriff Richard Roundtree. The story was that the girls were picked up in a white van and taken to John Millbrook's house, where there was a lot of drug activity. Then one of the twins was sexually assaulted. The other twin tried to fight and protect her sister, and she was hit and fell onto a table, busting her head open and bleeding profusely. Then that was the last time the girls were seen. So it's interesting that Sheriff Roundtree was familiar with Little Cheese, Oodle Boy, and Big Cheese, who I think was Little Cheese's father. Roundtree said that they needed to get a sworn statement from Ernest Vaughn, and he would follow up on it. He even said that he would interview Vaughn, and he seemed to be hopeful that they could get an indictment. But after looking into Vaughn's story, Shantae told Coates that she was told by law enforcement that Vaughn's story was about 2 different girls, not the Millbrook twins. Then Shantae said that the investigators still have not been keeping them up to date, not contacting them. So I think she's pretty disappointed with Roundtree. And maybe he's doing his job, but you think he could be in contact a little more frequently.
Oh, definitely.
Shantae runs the Facebook page, Missing Dannette and Jeanette Millbrook, and that's where she posts information on the case. There's also a local billboard that directs people to go to themillbrooktwins.com to submit any information that they may have on the case. They also received donations to help fund the hiring of a private investigator. The family's been keeping quiet about the details of the new investigation, but Louise told Oxygen.com that the investigator has uncovered some new information and persons of interest. And she also suggested that some searching may be done with cadaver dogs. But still, no arrests have been made and no suspects have been named.
And then in a follow-up conversation with Sheriff Roundtree, he said that 2 of his investigators did go and talk to Vaughn at the prison, and that he admitted to making up some of the details in connection to the girls. So it was confirmed that John Millbrook did live in the drug house, that the people named by Vaughn did exist, but as far as seeing Dannette and Jeanette there that night, that part was made up.
Yeah, Vaughn later stated that investigators had told him not to tell the truth and to say that he had made up the story. But how believable can he be?
Not very.
No. Roundtree said that he's offended by that and does not find Vaughn credible. He said that his investigators have interviewed any possible suspects and witnesses, but have really gotten no answers. So that's as far as the documentary went on this. And that's pretty much where we are now. Really nothing new being found. So it kind of seems like we'll never know, unless we get some kind of deathbed confession.
Possibly.
Possibly, but how likely, really?
Unlikely.
Unlikely. Because if anyone had a conscience, they probably would have come forward by now.
I would think.
And they could be dead. It's been so long. So it's just striking to me what a shitty investigation it was. and still kind of is not impressive. Now, I can understand they don't really have the resources to be spending a lot of time on a 30-year-old case, because I'm sure they have a lot more cases that are more recent. But still, I'm not impressed.
No, they haven't done much to impress anybody.
No. And these were, kids. So it's really just shameful to me that 2 kids like that could be disregarded so easily. And that's what it seems like to me. Detective Shipp just disregarded them. They're poor, they're black, they're girls, they're teens. I'm sure they just ran away or they were pregnant or something, is basically his attitude on this. And then that comment he made to the Fall Line podcasters about, if you find 2 dead girls, let me know. Fuck him. Wouldn't that be your response? Fuck you, buddy. How dare you?
How dare you?
Insulting and horrible. So I wish we could say that we have some answers, but we really don't. Still, I think it's not too late to get the word out, and maybe there's always a chance that we'll learn something. Be nice if Louise could know before she dies.
Wouldn't it?
Yeah. And just imagine Shantae, she's 12 when this happened, and 2 sisters are just gone, right? And then she's the one that has to pretty much take over because her mother is so beaten down and depressed, she doesn't feel like she can function anymore. It's incredibly sad.
It really is.
It's terrible.
Some of these cases we do, they get to you,
Well, they do, especially when it's an injustice like this. And different people are not treated as well as other people. It's just very upsetting. So in our show notes, we'll put a number in case anyone does just happen to know anything, so they can get in contact with investigators.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, we'll try. Okay, well, let's move on and do some feedback.
Okay, we got some voicemails that we'll play. There's 3.
3? Wow, thanks, guys.
And there's 1 email.
It's time for listener feedback.
Okay, who do you want to start with?
Let's do the voicemails. The first one's from Phil.
All right, a voicemail from...
Phil from Brisbane.
Oh, g'day, Jill. G'day, Dick. This is Phil from Brisbane in Australia. This isn't really a suggestion about an episode or anything like that. But a few years ago, Dick did mention that he once owned and drove a Volkswagen Beetle, just like Ted Bundy and myself. And I was just wondering if Dick could tell us a little bit more about the car, the year model, colour, why he bought it, and so on. Thank you.
All right, Phil, are you trying to make some connection between my husband and Ted Bundy?
Or a connection between Phil and Ted Bundy.
You 3 guys with your Beetles.
Oh, my first car I ever owned was a 1963 red Bug. And I had it for a couple, 3 years. And after I got married, it was a little small. So we moved up to the new, fancier Volkswagen Beetle, 67, 68, somewhere around there. It had bigger headlights, bigger taillights, a little more room in the car. It was nice. That one was powder blue.
Okay, so you didn't have any beige-colored ones?
No.
You didn't take it down to Florida?
And I didn't take the front seat out of it or anything like that.
Okay.
So
good to know. Speaking of Volkswagens, I'm waiting around for the VW bus, which is supposed to come out the end of this year. I'm very psyched for that. Now that seems super cool. It's electric. It's kind of like the old Beetles, but with a lot of modern conveniences and comforts. And it should be awesome.
You've been waiting a few years for this.
I've been waiting for this bus since 2018 when they said it would be coming out in 2019. And they've been putting it off and putting it off. But now they're claiming that it will be out the end of this year because it's been out in Europe for over a year now.
Oh, we can hope.
So I'm on a waiting list, and let's hope that happens. Anyway, enough car talk. What's our next voicemail?
We have a voicemail from Giovannia.
Hi, Dick and Jill. My name is Giovanna Vaughn, and I live in New York City. I've been listening to your podcast now for about a little over a year, and I really enjoy listening to it, especially on a Sunday afternoon when I need a break from everything that's going on in the world right now. Will have a question to ask you, or a comment, I guess you could call it. Have you heard the news about the update in the Dan Markel case? Actually, Charlie was found guilty I guess, applying to kill Dan, and he was given a very lengthy prison sentence, and he's in prison right now. And the mother was caught trying to leave the country to go to Vietnam, of all places, I guess because they don't have maybe extradition there or something. And she's in jail right now, about to go on trial too. And once she was a contestant on Wheel of Fortune, where she said that she was the coordinator of her children's activities. She didn't say she was their mom, she was their coordinator, which is kind of a weird thing for a mom to say. I don't know. But anyway, and all Wendy is doing is trying her best to stay out of it so she doesn't go to prison. I'm thinking maybe the mother and the son got together and plotted it together to get rid of Dan because they saw the distress it was causing Wendy. And when Wendy found out about it, she was horrified and decided not to say anything and did everything she could to protect herself and her children. But it's definitely interesting what's going on now. I mean, the mother's causing a lot of havoc in jail, and I think that mother, she really is a mother-in-law from hell. She just keeps on giving. But anyway, I love the podcast, and I love what you guys do. And even though I don't drink beer, I do like the beer reviews. So thank you for the podcast. Bye.
Thanks, Giovanna. That's a great voicemail. We really appreciate it. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. There's a really lot to this Markel trial, and I think it's fascinating as well. But I really think that this was a long time coming because we know that Catherine Megbuana was a girlfriend of the brother who just got convicted, Charlie. So we're pretty sure that he got her to hire these guys to drive down there and kill Dan.
Well, she had kids with Garcia.
Yeah, and she's been convicted, and so has Garcia.
Yeah, they were both convicted of first-degree murder.
Yeah, they were both convicted, and then I was kind of thinking, well, that doesn't seem right because the people behind it are certainly Wendy's family, especially Charlie. And, well, they had the mother on video as well. So
yeah, I think she's been charged.
Yes, just recently. She was trying to escape the country, as Giovanni mentioned.
Both her and her husband?
Yep. So Sigfredo Garcia and Catherine Megbuana were convicted of first-degree murder, and then Luis Rivera, who provided testimony, was convicted of second-degree murder. So just recently, Charlie Adelson, Markel's brother-in-law, was found guilty of first-degree murder in November, so just a couple months ago. And it was just a week after that when the parents, Donna and Harvey, were detained at the Miami airport, preparing to travel to Vietnam. So I did a little bit of reading, and Vietnam does not have an extradition agreement with the U.S. It does seem, though, that they have agreed to extradite quite a few fugitives over the past 10 years. So even though there's no agreement, she probably could have been extradited, but I think it's a money thing. She probably had plenty of money and was going to hide out there, which, she seems pretty evil, actually. For someone who was so concerned about her grandchildren, now she seems very concerned with herself. This Wheel of Fortune thing, probably most of you remember that Lori Vallow was on the Wheel of Fortune as well. So I don't know if there's any connection there. But with the mother on Wheel of Fortune saying she coordinated the activities of her children, definitely, good catch. That is weird. And it just kind of gives you the idea that she is super controlling over her family. There's really no doubt about that. Also, Wendy and Charlie Adelson, there is an older brother in the family. He's a physician. And I did read something on him a while back, probably when we were researching for the episode on this case. And that brother wants nothing to do with them, even Wendy, so he probably thinks Wendy's involved as well. He actually had a story about how he fell in love with a girl from India, and that was not cool with his parents. They wanted him to marry whatever they thought was appropriate in their minds. And he actually did marry the woman they wanted him to marry, which was, a white Jewish woman. I'm sure there's nothing wrong with her, but he was in love with this Indian woman, and he did end up getting a divorce and marrying the love of his life after all and rejecting his parents. So I feel really good about him. I think he made a good break with these people. So Donna was arrested and she's pleaded not guilty. Harvey hasn't been charged. But I remember they had Donna on video with an undercover cop talking to her. She said some things that made her look pretty guilty.
You bet.
Yeah. And there was just this whole thing of how much that family hated Dan Markel, which to me is crazy. He's a good guy.
I guess in their opinion, he just wasn't the right type for their daughter.
I guess not, but he was Jewish. He was educated. He was not abusive or anything. But it's just basically the family wanted to get their 2 children away from Dan and down to Miami where they lived. And they just seem kind of like sleazoids anyway. If you're willing to do that, there's something seriously wrong with you. And I think, Giovanni, you're being very generous to Wendy in saying that she found out and she just didn't want to say anything about it. I personally believe that Wendy had more to do with it than that. I think she knew damn well was going to happen, because one thing is she had a boyfriend who it seems like she tried to set up as the murderer, because she tried to have this planned when her boyfriend was going to be returning from out of town or leaving town or something. I can't remember exactly. But I definitely think Wendy was in on it, and I wouldn't be surprised if Wendy isn't arrested at some point. I think if there's any justice in the world, she will be.
Well, the other thing would be if she was so shocked by this whole thing, why did she keep quiet? Why didn't she talk to authorities?
Well, because she's totally in on it. She wanted to move to Miami with her kids. Because she even wrote a book about Tallahassee being so terrible and how she wanted to be down in Miami, under the pretense of it being fiction.
Of course.
Yeah, so the whole family's pretty yucky. But that's a fascinating update, because Donna must be like in her 70s. And
Yeah,
she's locked up.
She's in jail.
She's in jail. But it sure took a long time for Charlie to be convicted. It's kind of interesting because the murder was in 2014. And then these people who are less wealthy and don't have the resources and support, not saying they're good people either because they're killers, but they were arrested and convicted pretty early on. And then it took forever to get Charlie, and now we're just getting to Donna. And I think we will eventually get to Wendy as well.
Probably.
Yeah. And all that's available on YouTube if you like to watch trials or testimony. It is some fascinating stuff that, I continue to follow it because it's a fascinating case. So thanks again. That's a great thing to bring up in feedback.
And we have one more voicemail from Katie. She has a case suggestion.
Hey, Jill. Hey, Dick. I am so excited to leave my first voicemail. I am Katie from Colorado. I love the effort you guys put into the work that you guys do, the research that you guys do. I love the way you feed off of each other. I love the cussing every once in a while. It's a great podcast that you guys do, very much. I'm a double lung transplant patient, so I unfortunately do not drink anymore. But when I was drinking, stouts were my jam. So Dick, when you describe a beer with the lace or the taste of it, it's like I'm getting ready to open it, and I can just almost smell it of what it is. So I appreciate that you describe it so well for a non-drinker. Jill, for both of you, I have a case suggestion. If you go to the podcast case files, there are 2 cases in there that I'd like to hear your input on. The first one is called The Toy Box. It's about, I don't want to give too much away, but it's about a corrupt officer and his girlfriend who pick up a prostitute and then proceed to keep her captive. And anyways, I'd like to hear your research on it. The other one is called Silk Road. And that one is more of like the dark web issues, the way that the drugs and the guns and everything was getting passed through the dark web. So I think that would just be an interesting case if you want to cover it. Probably not. I don't think anybody gets murdered in it, but sometimes it's nice to not have a murder, I guess. So, anyways, like I said, I love listening to you guys. I do diamond art while I listen to you guys. So I'm hopefully going to send you an email of some of the pictures that I've done recently while I've been binging on you. I've been binging for probably the last 3 months. So I appreciate it. And I can't wait to hear what you come out with more. And I'm thank you so much. I appreciate it from the bottom of my heart how much I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much. You guys have a wonderful night, and I'll see you at the quiet end.
Thanks, Katie. So I think we do actually have a book on this toy box killer. Ray, right?
Yes.
Is in New Mexico.
That's the one.
Yeah. And I think I did read it, but then I was like, oh, I don't know if I can do it because there's so many people being tortured and all that.
Yeah. I mean, Katie was talking about it as a one and done deal. That this guy, David Parker Ray, killed as many as 60 to 100 women.
Yeah, I don't know if she said one and done, but she didn't specify there were that many.
There was a lot.
There was a lot, and sometimes those are tough. We don't do a lot of serial killers.
Well, and this guy was just beyond.
Yeah, just gross. And that's not to say we'll never cover it. It's hard to cover those.
Well, he had what he called the toy box.
Yeah.
It was the chamber or the room where he kept his victims. He tortured and raped the women. And then when he was tired of them, he killed them and dismembered them.
And I think there was something with his daughter finding out.
He apparently had a girlfriend, Cindy, who helped him.
Right.
He killed a huge number of people.
It's despicable, yeah.
And he died in prison. He said he was going to reveal some of his burial sites.
Yeah.
But he died before he could do that.
Well, if he wanted to, he could have. Obviously, He didn't give a shit.
Right.
So that's still a possibility. Silk Road sounds interesting. We have done a handful of cases that aren't murders, at least 3 or 4. So it's not necessarily a no because of that.
Well, I can look into it.
Look into it because it sounds interesting. All right. Well, those are some great suggestions. Thank you, Katie. Appreciate it very much. And you want to do an email before we sign off?
Sure. This was a case suggestion from Sharon via YouTube.
Okay.
So it's just a one sentence. Maybe look into this.
Okay.
So this is about the Militich sisters, Madeline and Dorothy, who were both elderly women. One was 83 or so, the other was in their upper 70s. So they lived together in an apartment in Des Moines, and they were befriended by a woman named Darla Countryman and her husband Ray. So these 2 women are planning a move to Missouri. The night before they were to move, Darla said to the ladies, "Why don't you spend the night at our apartment?" Which they accepted, and they were never seen again.
Holy shit. I've never heard of that one. That sounds very interesting.
So I have that little blurb, and we can do some more research on that.
Yeah, let's research that one. Thank you, Sharon. That's a good recommendation, too. We always get great recommendations.
We do.
And I love that we heard some follow-up on the Markel case. We don't get a lot of these follow-up emails on cases we've already done, but I love to talk about them because obviously if we've done the case, we're interested in it and we probably know more about it. So those are great things to talk about as well as case suggestions. And even the Beetle was kind of fun to talk about, especially by making the Bundy connection, you know?
Of course.
Yes. Okay, well, before we say goodbye, a quick reminder about our premium option where you can get early, ad-free, and bonus episodes. We do cover a bonus case each month, sometimes 2, sometimes we'll recap a dateline or something. We also send our new subscribers a gift with a personalized thank you note. And you can subscribe by going to tygrabber.com/subscribe. And that way you get all your TCB episodes early, ad-free, plus get extra episodes. And there's always a link in our show notes that you can click on if you're interested in seeing more about that. Some other ways we ask for help for the show is if you like us, give us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen, but Apple Podcasts is usually the most helpful. We also love to get emails and voicemails with your feedback and case suggestions. We'd also appreciate it if you have other friends that like true crime, maybe suggest to them that they check out our show because word of mouth can be really helpful as well. If you do have feedback or case suggestions for us, you can send an email to truecrimebrewery@tygrabber.com. Voicemails can be sent by just clicking on the voicemail link in our show notes, or there's a widget on the front page or any page of our website where you can click on leave a voicemail. And then you can just record your voicemail right there on your laptop or phone or whatever device you're using. If it's easier, you can also just record an audio file and put it in an email and send it to us at truecrimebrewery@tygrabber.com. So thank you all for spending this time with us today. We super appreciate it. And we will see you next time at the Quiet End.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.